Isaac Castellano, and I am the Associate Director of the Institute for Advancing American Values and a faculty member in the School of Public Service. Tonight we get the opportunity to listen to a cross-section of students from across our campus on what they value and why, and how that value informs their economic, political, social, or educational positions. In a few minutes, I will ask Alan Dalton, Emeritus Faculty in the Department of Economics, to come up and say a few words about the logistics of tonight's event. But first, I want to say a few words about the Institute and a little context to our proceedings this evening. As many of you know, the Institute for Advancing American Values was established in 2021 to address the challenge of partisanship both on and off campus under the direction of Boise State President Marlene Trump, who cannot be here this evening due to another conflict. Event conflict. Our goal here in the Institute is to inspire students, the students, faculty, and staff at Boise State to talk and listen to each other respectfully about the issues and values that have and continue to shape American life. In other words, the Institute seeks to create space on and off campus for dialogue, the exchange of ideas, and of course, listening. We don't think we're going to change anyone's views, and we don't aim to. We simply want people to listen and be able to express their views, and for others to listen, if nothing else, to better understand those with whom you disagree with. Not understanding is ignorance, and as a university, we are in the business of enlightenment. And we have a series of events and programs with this in mind. We organized a distinguished lecture series. Last spring, we hosted Jonathan Haidt, a critic of higher education and social media, among other things. In the last fall, 2023, we had Robert George and Cornel West, two major public intellectuals on either side of the political divide, who are friends and have been traveling the country, essentially speaking to groups about how we can bridge those differences and come together. In spring of 2023, we had Arthur Brooks, who told our audience that you should confront and critique your side of the political divide with more energy and focus and find other ways to bridge to the other, to build bridges to the other. And later this month, on October 25th, we will have David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, here on campus. That's October 25th, 7 p.m. in the Extra Mile Arena. And he is going to talk probably about the election a lot, because it will be just a few days away, but also his recent book, which is really about how we know each other, how we build those bridges to the other side. Additionally, the Institute hosts the Campus Conversation Series in partnership with the Heterodox Academy campus community. And this is a place on campus we meet every few weeks where faculty and staff can come together and talk about the issues facing higher ed and the campus. We have one this coming Thursday at 11:30 for those faculty and staff in the audience. We have an undergraduate fellows program where a group of self-nominated students provide insight on how we can go about energizing and engaging students on campus with this programming, and several of them are speaking this evening. We have a research grant program where we fund scholars on campus here to explore and interrogate how American values intersect with their work. And this fall, we have been organizing the Dialogue for Democracy, of which this event is part of. And this is an effort to draw attention to the upcoming election. And we have a series of panels and events. And our next one is October 9th at 5:30. At 7 o'clock in the Alumni and Friends building, and it is a panel about election security. We're going to have some folks from the Ada County Elections Office, as well as some political scientists, speak on what's been happening locally and nationally in terms of election security. And of course, the Listens Project. This is the 9th Listens event. We've held Idaho Listens events in Boise, Idaho Falls, Coeur d'Alene, Caldwell, and tomorrow we will be in Twin Falls. And this is the 4th Boise State Listens. If you go to our website, you can see the link to the Idaho Public Television documentary about the first Idaho Listens, as well as recordings of of the Boise State Listens events. And again, this one tonight is being recorded and will be posted up on our website in a short while. So why are we doing all of this? What does this have to do with American values? We are doing this because we believe that any functioning democracy starts with sharing and listening. We need people to express themselves, share their thoughts, dreams, struggles, vision for the future in a civil way, and we need the rest of us to listen. As for American values, as our director, Andrew Finstuen, often remarks, everybody has values, and it's true. It's an American value to respect the fact that other people have values. And you may not agree with them, with what they say, the policies they advocate for the folks they vote for. Yet sharing and listening, voting and participating, these are the critical linchpins of democracy. So, and I've said this before, it may sound really grandiose that we're here building the foundation of democracy, but respecting the freedom to express oneself, slowing down and listening, which is what we're going to do this evening, this is really part of a healthy political culture and something we all can contribute to, and we're doing that this evening. So I'd like to invite our first four speakers to the stage, as well as Alan Dalton to share with us the logistics of this evening's event. Two kind of business things. If you are an honor student, there is a sign-in sheet at the table out in the lobby. And then additionally, we'll have some, you saw them as you came in, some refreshments and snacks after we are done here. And we will have the vice presidential debate is tonight. And in this room, we are going to have a little debate watch party, and some pizza is going to come. So if you have time to hang out, please do so and join us for that. So thank you for being here. And Alan.
Hello, as Isaac said, my name is Alan Dalton. I'm an emeritus faculty in the Department of Economics, and I'm a faculty fellow for the Institute for Advancing American Values. Again, we want to welcome you to the fourth Boise State Listens. Our program today is meant for all of us to practice reverent listening, like you're listening to the preacher in church. We don't interrupt him. We want to listen without thinking or worrying about responding. We're going to begin by asking you all to take these things out of your pocket or your purse, I know you have them, and turning them off or silencing them. Thank you. As Isaac noted, University TV is here today recording this event. So we want to make sure that the listeners and viewers of that program also practice reverent listening by their viewing not being interrupted by applause. At the end of the program, there's going to be a QR code at the table outside for extra credit. Our speakers, who will be telling their stories in their own words, were helped in drafting those words by Nancy Buffington, and I want you all to give her a warm round of applause. As Isaac noted, our student speakers are from diverse geographic and socioeconomic backgrounds, majors, and political opinions. Each will speak for 5 to 7 minutes in response to the question we pose to them. What do you value and why? And how does that inform your socioeconomic and political views? I'll introduce the first speaker in each half of the program, and then each student will introduce themselves as they wish to introduce themselves. We are asking you to not applaud between speakers. Use the time between speakers to reflect on the message you have just listened to. At the end of the first four speakers, we will take a 10-minute break, and it will only be 10 minutes, so if you go out and get something to eat, make sure you get back in here. And then we will hear from the last four speakers. At the conclusion of all 8 speakers, then we will thank all of our speakers, and then share, if there's any left, some cookies and brownies. Your job and my job is to hold our applause and verbal responses till the end. That does not mean that a spontaneous chuckle or tear or smile is forbidden, but please refrain from overt displays and clapping. Be silent and respectful as we listen. Be curious as we listen. Be gracious and charitable as we listen. Now, I know this is something that's uncomfortable, especially if you haven't done it 3 previous times like I have, okay, to actually hold your applause, because the first reaction after somebody finishes is always that, okay? So to try to get that out, we're going to give all of our speakers a pre-thank. And now that's the last time we will applaud until the end of the entire program. With that, our first speaker is Sunny.
When I think of my mother, I remember first her laugh. Head thrown back, her mouth, always dressed in lipstick, Revlon soft silver red to be exact, wide open. My mother loved to laugh. She was witty and clever. She was very often the source of her own amusement as much as others. As a child, I was mesmerized by my mother. The late-in-life caboose of 7 children, I became my mother's shadow in almost all she did. And my mother did a lot. When I was very young, my mother was the director of the Stop ERA movement in 2 states. For those younger than me, which is probably a lot of you, the ERA, or Equal Rights Amendment, sought to enshrine equal rights for women in the U.S. Constitution. Passed in 1972, the fight for ratification by the states became heated, with conservative women leading an organized fight against it, my mother being one of them. She spoke at rallies filled with thousands of women. She debated feminists live on television. She hosted her own conservative radio talk show program. She was, in every way, a powerhouse. In our household, feminist was the F word. I was not allowed to join Girl Scouts because, in my mother's words, they were just a bunch of feminists trying to turn little girls into lesbians. So though I was too young to understand what a lesbian was, I knew it was something I was not supposed to be. My mother fought openly against gay rights in the 80s and 90s, believing in her core that queerness, like feminism, was a threat to all that was good in the world. As my mother's almost constant companion, I absorbed and metabolized all of these messages as truth. And yet, I stand before you today, a very feminist and very gay woman. I am so left-leaning, I probably am prone to walk in circles. It would be easy to assume that due to our extreme differences, I find myself at odds with my mother as a person. And at times, this has been very true. It can be difficult to find common ground with someone who views the world so differently, especially when those views disparage a core part of our identity. I, and likely many of you, have struggled in close relationships as well as with strangers to desire meaningful connection where dissimilarity exists. It can feel so much easier to sift people into boxes and decide who is safe, who is lovable, who is worthwhile, rather than to seek to know the person behind an opinion. However, I have found that when I make assumptions about others, when I close myself off to the deeper reality of who they are, I deny myself the opportunity to be influenced by the good in them. We are, all of us, multifaceted and complex. To assume I know the truth of another person is to reduce them to a moment, an opinion, or a decision. It is to view them through a lens of my own making instead of with an eye of clarity. To see the good in those I might consider my enemy, or at least not worth my time, requires me to be open to the complexity of each one of us. Let's once again consider my mother. She was a polarizing figure for many people, me included. As I grew older and found myself at odds with my mother's politics, I very often found myself at odds with her. In disregarding my mother's views, I began to disregard her. I saw her as invalid and someone whose views were to be feared, condemned, or pitied. But in turning my back from the possibility of her value, I failed to see the valuable lessons she was teaching me. For instance, it would be easy to label my mother a homophobe, and I suppose that is true. But that singular label doesn't leave room for the reality that my mother had very dear gay friends who were invited into our home for holidays and family events, laughing loud and long with my mother, friends who loved our family like their own, one of whom sang at my father's funeral in a Mormon church. How is this possible when my mother fought so vocally against gay rights? Honestly, I don't know, except that humans contain multitudes. My mother saw these friends as more than one facet of their identity, and they, astonishingly, had the grace to do the same. My mother showed this capacity when, during my high school years, she headed a domestic violence agency in our small Nevada town. Given her earlier activism, it would be easy to see my mother as anti-woman, yet she gave all she had to protect and support women, helping them feel empowered to begin new lives. She used her skills as a community leader to raise funds for a new shelter and advocated for change within law enforcement to better address partner violence. But even more amazing to me was witnessing the compassion she had for those who had perpetrated abuse. She understood the horrific consequences of their actions, yet showed them incredible kindness as she listened to their stories. She saw them as human beings with complicated histories who also needed to be accountable for their choices. She worked to establish resources for them to receive counseling. She held space for their complexity and humanity when few others did. My mother, who would have hated the term social justice warrior, was one in all the best ways. She was a champion of the underdog, the misunderstood, the lonely, and the forgotten. In any community we were a part of, my mother sought out the friendless and befriended them. She loved those often deemed unlovable and used her time and energy to help improve their lives. She could have used her many skills to promote herself, but she chose to advocate for those who felt voiceless and powerless. The very best parts of feminism I learned from my anti-feminist mother. I'm just thinking of her hearing that sentence. She taught me to stand up and speak out for the things that matter. She taught me to claim power instead of waiting for others to hand it to me. She bucked convention and patriarchy to have her voice heard. She saw herself as equal to any man in ability and rights. She saw women as a powerful and necessary force in fighting for justice and right. She taught me to believe I could have influence for good in the wider world. She taught me to look beyond myself and see the needs of others. It is often said that it is hard to hate anyone up close. When we hear people's stories, when we look in their eyes, when we glimpse their humanity, their hopes, their dreams and fears can become as real and meaningful to us as our own. We begin to open ourselves up to their complexity. Though I value this ability, I fail at it miserably every day. I make snap judgments, I dismiss, I ignore. But I'm also working every day to question that response and make just a little more room to consider the possibility of the worth of all of us. This is what I value. The space we can create to allow people to exist more fully, to surprise us, and if we are open, to teach us. When I think of my mother, I think of this.
Hi, my name is Mark. Show me your friends, and I'll show you your future. My dad always told me that, when I was growing up, and he said that it was something his mom used to tell him, and that it was true. You have to surround yourself with things that make you successful. People that keep you focused. People that will lift you up and stop you from getting dragged down in the minutiae of life. And as a kid that grew up moving around 5 different states, I listened to them. The longest time I'd lived in a state until I'd moved here about 6 years ago was for 3 years. And as a shy kid, well, let me tell you, by the 3rd year, I was struggling to make any friends. It was like, oh, okay, great, I got that guy's name. Heck yeah, awesome. But I was looking and focused on where these people would take me. And that got me into trouble. So let me take you back 4 years. I promise the story relates, but hear me out. So 4 years was my senior year of high school. This is 2020, the year that COVID hit. And right out of high school, actually right before it ended, I started dating this girl that I'd known a while. We'd reconnected after years of barely talking. And suddenly, we were spending all of our time together. At this time, we thought, college season is coming up. We're getting older. We're going to be going off to college. Let's date someone that we know that's going to be safe. And this way, we can explore and learn and grow, as you do in a relationship as you're trying to figure that out. But as time went on and COVID happened, the relationship kept going. And where we thought, this is our point that we'll break up and call it, we continued. And we found that things were still working. She showed me who I could be, and she taught me how to loosen up. And this little shy kid, I want you to imagine, this guy has no idea what he's doing. He's terrified out of his mind. He's terrified to say hi to someone. And she's like, no, it's okay. Go do these things, explore, play the guitar. She taught me how to loosen up, how to enjoy the little moments, and how to love someone else. But most importantly, she showed me something I wasn't ready to learn, and that was how to deal with feelings. Now, I've always been the kind of person, especially growing up, let's go back to that quote, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. I took that practically. You point me in a direction, if you have a problem, if you're hurting, I see a door there, I'm a barbarian, I'm gonna go crash that thing down. Let's solve the problem so you don't have to feel the feelings, And if you solve the problem, everything else, especially the feelings, is just gonna take care of itself. But life doesn't work that way, and neither does relationships. So we spent just under 2.5 years together, growing, laughing, and sharing dreams. But then things changed. We realized that we were heading in different directions in life, and we decided that it would be smart to transition from a relationship to a friendship. But that was when the real challenge began, because just 2 weeks after we broke up, her mom unexpectedly passed away. This was someone who I'd gotten to know very deeply, very closely. I'd been to her house many times. I'd play the piano at her house, and her mom, the brightest spot in the world, would come over and say, "Mark, that sounds really nice," even though it was my second time ever seeing a piano in my life. When her mom passed away, she lost the biggest light in her sky, and everything changed. And as a problem-solving person, I look at that and I go, how do I fix this? What do I do? What do you do? You can only try to be there. But my tools weren't being there. They weren't talking. They weren't understanding feelings. They were solve the problem. But you can't go back in time. You can't bring someone's mom back to life. So I remember driving down the freeway, and I was headed to the hospital where her mom was at. And I got the call, and she told me her mom had passed away. So I invited her over to grieve and to try to process. And in the months coming after that, I tried to continue interacting with her. I went to her mom's funeral. I tried to hang out with her. We went on long walks. We talked. We did what we could, but we didn't have the tools to handle that situation. And as a fixer, as a doer, the more and more that I did to try to interact, the more it felt like I was getting pushed away. I was getting pushed further from her. And I was trying to fix things, but grief isn't something you can fix. So after a couple months, I lost that friendship. Not because I didn't care enough, but because I didn't understand that sometimes being present was more important than having answers. And it's in those moments that I learned one of the most important lessons of my life, which is that communication isn't about solving problems, although that is important. It's about connection. It's about understanding that sometimes you don't have to fix things. You really just need to be there to listen and to understand and to empathize. That experience taught me the value of communication, but it also taught me the value of growth, because that happened 2 years ago. And here, I'm sitting here talking about this thing that's in the past, and honestly, it has been the biggest impact on my life, because I've had to work my butt off for the past 2 years to get to where I am today, to talk about feelings and understand, and to work through grief, something that you can't just solve and make it go away. And although me in the past couldn't understand that life wasn't about having the right answers all the time, I understand now that it's about being open to change, about learning and supporting those around you. These values, communication, growth, and empathy, don't just shape my relationships, but they also shape how I see and engage with the world. We live in a time where everyone is shouting their opinions, where political discourse often is just a battleground for dominance, rather than a point where we are trying to solve a problem, rather than a conversation about solutions. I got stopped the other day as I was going to the parking garage trying to just leave class because I'm tired, it's been a long day, by this guy harassing me and several other students, just starting like, hey, what are your political beliefs? And then shouting at us why we were wrong. Here's the thing, you can't solve a problem if you aren't willing to listen. You can't grow if you think you already know everything. And in my personal life, I've learned to value listening more than speaking. I learned that real growth happens when you're willing to challenge your own assumptions, when you're willing to do some introspection, when you're willing to take some time and think and challenge yourself and force yourself to be open to hearing perspectives that are different from your own. And that shapes everything that I do today, whether it's politics, social issues, disagreements among friends. When I think about my political beliefs, they're rooted in the same values that I keep talking about: communication, growth, connection, because I believe in the importance of dialogue, of listening to understand rather than to respond, and in growth of not just saying, you know what, my grandfather, he's this great guy, but boy, oh boy, is he really leaning this far that way. But like also understanding where that view comes from. In a world that feels increasingly divided, I choose to hold on to the belief that communication and understanding are the keys to building a better future. That just like in my personal relationships, real change happens not through conflict, but through connection. So when you ask me what I value and how those values shape my beliefs, I say this: I value growth, I value communication, I value empathy, I value connection, I value respect, I value what makes us having this conversation here today. And these are not just abstract ideals. They're foundations of how I live my life and how I interact with the world around me. And if there's one thing I've learned with this, it's that the people we surround ourselves with and the conversations we have and the values that we hold dear are what are going to shape our future. They're what shape my current friend groups and everything that I do. So I started off with this quote, and I'll end it too. Show me your friends, and I'll show you your future.
Pink. Keyword associations: softness, kindness, nurture, compassion, and femininity. When you think of the color pink, your mind may conjure vivid imagery of a wide variety of objects and ideas dealing with femininity: flowers, dresses, blush, bubblegum. In the summer of 2023, pink expanded into a cultural phenomenon, but not just a cultural phenomenon, the cultural phenomenon. Young and old people alike rushed to theaters to see the long-awaited Barbie, a live-action fantasy comedy film detailing the extravagant life of a Barbie living in the supposedly ideal female world, Barbie Land. However, as the movie progresses, Barbie's presumptions of a perfect, happy world is soon shattered as she experiences the real world, Earth. What started as a pink wonderland quickly became something deeper. Because beneath the glitter and glam, the Barbie movie gave us a story about what it truly means to be a girl and the reality checks we have now as women. For everyone present today, but especially the women who feel like they have had to stifle their authentic selves for acceptance, I value girlhood. Girlhood is more than just my experiences when I was an adolescent, because even now, the little girl inside of me plays a significant role in the complex transformation of my mind, body, and capabilities. In her roller coaster of a journey, Barbie has to make sacrifices along the way in order to be accepted into a world dominated by societal expectations. Although her sacrifices are apparent and clear in order to provide a happy ending for everyone involved, the sacrifices I make as a woman on the day-to-day are not nearly as far-fetched or obvious to the common eye. Ever since I was in high school, I found value in participating in speech and debate, a team program that requires me to hone my critical thinking skills and argumentative rhetoric. Although speech and debate has often been my safe space to express myself, there was one tournament during my senior year of high school that was the equivalent of a harsh reality in Barbie. Right before our state championship of the year, I decided to treat myself and buy a new pantsuit, because who doesn't love dropping $1,000 on clothes, right? Ever since I was young, I adored shopping and dressing up, so it certainly wouldn't be any different now. Scanning through the boutique, a specific color caught my eye. The speck of a salmon pink, intriguing in an ocean of navies and blacks. So, quote-unquote, feminine, yet so empowering. This pink is bright, but not too bright. Girly, but not too girly. It didn't involve a skirt or a dress. It was just a blazer and pants. When I showed up at the state tournament in it, my coach took one look at it and said, "I hope you don't plan to wear that for the debate." When prompted to elaborate, he exclaimed, "Your judges aren't going to take you seriously when you're dressed in all pink." I knew the underlying implication. I wasn't going to be taken seriously because I was wearing a bright color associated with femininity, and therefore seen as quote-unquote unprofessional. My inner girl was crying out for attention. So instead of reconsidering the suit, I learned how to incorporate this inner girl in another place of the program, speech. I learned that I had to sacrifice part of my girlhood in debate in order to increase my competitive potential, but my sacrifice doesn't mean I wasn't shining in a different area of my passion. With my family, the sacrifice is similar. As the eldest daughter, I was expected to be financially independent and strong because my mom was never in a position to have that luxury. And yet, my girlhood never left. I feel proud when I go shopping and have the ability to spend my own money on pretty jewelry, accessories, and clothes. My blood, sweat, and tears. Girlhood allowed me to compromise in the feminine attributes and qualities I associate with myself without ever losing all of the lollipops and rainbows. Although I relate to Margot Robbie's Barbie in many ways, there is one crucial aspect of girlhood that the Barbie we know and love simply cannot address: the intersection of my societal expectations as a woman versus as an Asian woman. Kenslin, the co-chair of the Chinese-Canadian National Council Toronto chapter, summarizes the general stereotype of high-achieving Asians well. Quote, "Through hard work, you can achieve success. But when they talk about success, it is closeness to whiteness," unquote. My race is supposedly high-achieving, successful, happy, but Women are supposedly mindful, demure, elegant, emotional. A couple weeks ago, I had some of my first ever professional photos taken. When sent into my Vietnamese group chat, my aunt was the first to respond. I sat and waited in anticipation as the text bubble floated, only for my heart to drop when I saw her message. Hảo Nguyên giỏi quá, nhưng mà phải giảm cân, ok con? Thảo Nguyen, my Vietnamese name, you're doing great, but you have to lose weight, okay? The inner girl was crying out again. No matter how many hours I spend getting ready for the day, how many A's I get, how many accolades I can add to my resume, the ideals instilled in me from a young age will always raise questions. Do I look okay? Will others think I'm pretty? Will people think I'm trying too hard and want attention? Should I eat this? Should I work out longer today because I ate more? Should I speak up, or will I sound bitchy and rude? I can be high-achieving and successful, but even my own family won't acknowledge that without further stereotypes about what I have to act or look like to be accepted as a woman as well. Whereas Barbie often only has the latter instilled upon her, my upbringing has taught me that I need to fit into both molds to be truly celebrated. But once again, I still find a way to represent the positive aspects of girlhood by choosing a different name. Angel. Angel is professional, but Angel is also feminine, elegant. Angel can be respected. Angel can be known as Angel, not just as the Asian girl from Idaho. Angel is an indirect way for me to step out of the box others have tried to place me in. Looking back at the Barbie movie, it's clear that it wasn't just about the character, the fashion, or even the world of pink. It was a deep dive into girlhood. It's the lens through which we first discover who we are. And it's not something we outgrow even as we recognize the challenges it comes with. Girlhood encompasses all of me, the dreams, the struggles, the playfulness, and the strength. Girlhood allows us to realize that we don't have to fit into a mold. We can define ourselves. But that definition isn't static either. It's a continuous process of growth, self-love, and discovery as we all struggle to be what society expects of us. Allow the magic of girlhood to guide you down the right path, even when others try to diminish that life.
Life is this beautiful, painful kind of thing. There's those times where you triumph, times where you feel loved, times where you feel like things are going just right. But also times where nothing happens at all. Times where you feel unforgivable. Times where you feel unworthy. Times where you feel like a burden, existing but not living. Times where you feel like just maybe you may be even better off not alive at all. Now, I want to start off by saying, if you've ever felt this way, or if you are feeling this way, you're not alone. You've never been alone, and you will never be alone. People understand what you feel. Now, you may think that's crazy, and to an extent, you're right. Nobody can feel exactly what you're going through. But thanks to this painfully beautiful superpower we have as humans, called empathy, they can still go through it with you. And if you ask me, it's not a facetious thing to call empathy a superpower. Superpowers often save lives. And being completely honest, in the closest to death experience I've had in my life, it was of all things empathy that saved it. And maybe rightfully so. In the fall of 2019, I had a lot going for me. I'd worked incredibly hard for 9 months in preparation for a big sophomore football season. I had just been elected to the student council. had just got my driver's license. My personal hero, my mom, had just received a big promotion at work. I was old enough to watch my little sisters on my own, and was fortunate enough to have a popular twin sister with tons of cute friends. But things were taking a big turn. At that time, I was struggling with the lingering effects of the third and by far worst concussion of my time playing high school football. I couldn't think clearly or perform simple tasks in school. I wasn't the quiet, gentle kid anymore. I was angry and pessimistic. I'd lash out at my parents and siblings for oftentimes no reason at all, and then self-isolate to beat myself up over it. Despite being in the best shape of my life, I hated myself. My body, my personality, all of it. I was too soft, too nice, too weird. Sentiments that were only nailed into my head harder by teammates who resented me for sitting out over something as measly as a concussion. People noticed this shift, and in hindsight, they were doing everything they could to help. My family and the few friends I let into my circle didn't just care about me, they loved me. They wanted to be there for me. But my impaired mind didn't want me to think this. My mind wanted me to believe I was alone, that nobody cared for me, that everything I did was wrong, and as such, I could only feel relief in hating myself, that my existence was a burden to others, and eventually, the only rational thing to do was to end it all. And despite fervent efforts from my parents, I chose to believe these lies instead of them every single time. After all, if they were keeping me from football, and my teammates weren't really my friends, and I wasn't going to be able to succeed in school to make something out of myself, there was no point in being alive any longer. So on November 24th, 2019, I devised a plan to end it all, a plan to give my story the horrific end I thought it deserved. And I was this close, ready to grab my keys and leave the house for the final time, when, by what I can only describe as a stroke of God, my dad just knew, and he stopped me. He put his hands on me, called my mom, and took me to get help, holding my shoulder the entire drive to the hospital to keep his only boy from making the ultimate mistake. I love you, buddy. Just hold on. I know. The following days were ones that truly shaped my life, with many of which being spent in a local treatment center. There, I was diagnosed with disorders I never knew I had, and put through a head scan to assess the damage of my brain and the effects it was having on my mental health. Days were spent going back and forth between therapy sessions, eating meals with fellow patients, hearing about their struggles, meeting with doctors, and ultimately spending a lot of time sitting back and just reflecting on why I felt the way I did and what life could look like in the future. It was in those moments that I think I made the two most important realizations of my life. Number one, getting help takes courage. Especially as a young man who had had it drilled into my head for several months by teammates and coaches that being vulnerable and putting my well-being first was soft, weak, and selfish, I finally began to understand that their words did not matter. And that while I was still depressed and fragile from the trauma of wanting to end my life, I was alive, thanks to realization number two, empathy. It took me a long time to understand how my dad knew and did what he did. After all, on that night, I thought everyone just saw me as a burden anyways. But he wasn't really lying when he said, I know. To put it mildly, he'd grown up in poverty and abuse from his mother in Southern California. He'd seen his own little brother come home from war crippled and riveted with PTSD. And he'd stared a seemingly fatal disease in the face just several years prior and beat it. My old man had suffered, but it built empathy in him. He didn't just feel for me. Through his own struggles, he was able to feel with me, understand where I was at, and take action to save me. Even though he had never experienced exactly what I had, he knew pain and the feeling of wanting it for it all to just be done when he saw it. Mohsen Hamid once said, empathy is about finding echoes of another person in yourself. When we see those we care about struggling, or heck, even those we don't care about, I contend we have an obligation to find those echoes of them and their struggles within us. I challenge you to think, what have I gone through? What have I struggled with? How did that make me feel? And even if it is not the same thing or feeling as the person you're trying to support, find it within yourself to channel that pain into feeling with that other person instead of just for them. I'm not asking you to take on their life struggles or beliefs, but just be there, in the moment with them, really with them. That's empathy. It's why I'm here today. People from various different backgrounds finding echoes of their stories within me and supporting me on my journey to where I'm at today. Imperfect, but happy. thriving in school, leading with love, and working towards a career in public service fighting for vital progressive reforms in our healthcare, environmental, and public education systems. As a progressive, empathy empowers me to see things that I may not be and struggles that I may not personally go through, yet still find it within me to support people in pursuit of their vital rights and needs. An example of this is as the son of 2 healthcare workers, I believe healthcare is a fundamental human right. I hear the everyday struggles from my mom, who in her work at a community health center serves the most in-need patients in our community. I don't know these patients or the exact circumstances they go through, but I see the toll it takes on her. And I hear the weight in her voice as she talks about those who fall through the cracks of our current system. These are hardworking people, families, and elders who deserve the same care we would wish for our loved ones. To me, something like Medicare for All is not a handout policy. To me, it's a declaration that we as a society choose empathy over indifference, and that healthcare is a basic human right, not a privilege for the few. But, just as empathy fuels such deep-held beliefs of mine, it also empowers me to see my conservative friends, of which I have many, and still love them for the values we do share. We may disagree fervently on the specifics, sometimes to the point that it may seem irreconcilable, but shared ideals of community, liberty, and fairness can be a powerful driver for respecting each other's views. So, just as I challenge myself, I challenge you to find those echoes of yourself and others you disagree with in such a polarized time. The results may just surprise you. Empathy didn't just save my life. It continues to keep me, and I believe most of us, thriving through this beautifully painful life. Empathy takes work, vulnerability, and compassion. But if you ask me, it's those people who are seemingly so different from us, who through those very echoes of similarity and solidarity can be the reason we keep going. Together, through empathy, we can make a more just, collaborative, and gentle tomorrow.
We will now take a 10-minute break. We'll resume at 5:58. It's 5:58. It's 5:58, and the first speaker for the second part of our program is Austin.
I would like to start my talk today by telling you all the story of a man named Stephen Hopkins. Mr. Hopkins was an Englishman born in late 16th century England. When financial hardship hit, he left his home and his family behind to make his fortune in the colony of Jamestown. On the way to Virginia, a storm hit, and their ship crashed on the shores of Bermuda. After many months, the colonists built new ships from the wreckage and finished their journey to Virginia. When they arrived, they found the colony almost wiped out from the winter before. Hopkins went on to help rebuild the colony, as well as fight in the Anglo-Powhatan War, the first war fought by British settlers in America. Eventually hearing of his wife's death, Hopkins returned to England before coming back to the continent with a group of pilgrims. This time, the ship that carried him to the New World was called the Mayflower. Hopkins' descendants would go on to fight in the Revolution and in the Civil War, explore the frontier, fight for Texas's independence, serve with Custer in the 7th Cavalry, and conquer the American West. Stephen Hopkins is my 13th great-grandfather, and these men are my family. As a kid, my grandpa would always tell me the story of our family history and how they shaped this American nation. It was always looked at as something to be proud of. I was taught to love America, not just because it's a great country, and to honor her heroes, not just because they were great men, but because America was my country, and her heroes are my forefathers. As I grew older, I noticed a growing sense of hostility, not just to the men who built this country, but to their descendants and the culture that they carried with them. At first, it was very subtle. It began with ignorance about our history. At school and in the media, I would constantly hear the idea that America didn't have a culture, or that America was simply an idea, not connected to any particular people, culture, or place. But it quickly ramped up. For me, this hit a boiling point in the summer of 2020 in the midst of the George Floyd riots. That summer, following the death of George Floyd, a wave of anti-American sentiment swept through our country. Monuments of American men were torn down throughout our cities under the guise of fighting racism. However, statues of men like Abraham Lincoln, who did more than any other American to end racism, were also torn down. As monuments of George Washington came tumbling down, statues to George Floyd were erected in their place. Names of military bases, sports teams, and even the logos on syrup brands were changed, and a greater emphasis was placed on supporting minority-owned businesses as opposed to white ones. Out of all the crazy things that happened that summer, one video stuck with me in particular. One night, as I was lying in bed, scrolling through social media, I saw a video of people in a cemetery kicking down the headstones of Civil War veterans. Men who fought for their homes and their way of life were now having something as simple as their final resting place disgraced. I couldn't help but think, what if one of those headstones belonged to one of my ancestors? Or what happens if 100 years down the line, if the grave of my grandfather is kicked over because he served in the Air Force during Vietnam? I realized that this needed to stop. I want to know that my children can look back at their family, the men and women who made America what it is, and be proud of it. I want them to be able to remember and honor their forefathers without being called racist. In a period of time where we have whole months dedicated to celebrating Hispanic heritage, Asian heritage, and others, the kind of American whose family has been here for over 400 years seems to be getting forgotten as the years go by. I'm somebody who loves to travel and experience different cultures. I've been all throughout Western Europe, the Caribbean, Asia, Mexico. When I've been to some of these non-Western countries, I notice that the people are extremely proud of their heritage and where they come from. It is a universal consensus that they are able to admire their past and honor their people. It is something that I love to see, and I appreciate when I am in a country where people are so proud of their nation. However, in the West, there is a different consensus. In the West, people are constantly told that they come from an evil stock of people who, according to author of White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo, are inherently racist. This kind of thinking leaves people without a sense of identity. It leaves people feeling like they are not part of something bigger than themselves, without any sense of duty to those who came before them. A country without a common identity and a common history is a country that cannot last. Bringing back a sense of American identity is not only acceptable, but it is something that is essential if we want to move forward as a nation. Moving forward, I would encourage you all to look at these issues through a different lens. Not a lens of hate or disdain for those who came before us, but a lens of honor and veneration. After all, people of all races and all religions are flocking to come to this nation that those men created. Thank you.
Keep your eyes open, head down, mouth shut, and never volunteer. These directions, lovingly bestowed as a reminder by my father every time I went on a mission, were crucial to my safety and survival as a military police gunner downrange. As a woman in a male-dominated field, I quickly learned that these commands not only applied to my life in the turret, but also in the company area. I also learned, however, that safety and survival look like many different things, and that these tips do not cast the protective spell that I once thought that they did. I was 19 when I was charged with drinking underage. We had just gotten orders to Iraq, and I found out that my boyfriend had cheated on me. Angry, I went to a house party and I had a few drinks. As is often the case, when you have a bunch of people with their brains still developing, the company rumor mill ran rampant, and I found myself in front of my commanding officer, trying to distill what events had actually occurred. So much for keeping my head down. I admitted to drinking underage and received an Article 15. The guys in my unit told me that I should have kept my mouth shut and let allegations against other individuals pass. Since integrity is one of our main core values in the Army, and I considered myself honest to a fault, I couldn't let that happen. So there I was, in Iraq a few months later with a demoted rank and covered in Middle Eastern sand while my sergeant smoked me. Corrective action through physical exertion. The idea is to physically exhaust someone to the point that they think on their actions. And as I threw up from chugging warm water out of a water bottle, my sergeant told me that I had no integrity. I was furious. How could this bastard tell me I had no integrity when that was the very reason I was having to beat my face in the dirt? What did he know about my values? Admittedly, his words have come back to haunt me many times over the last few years. When we returned from Iraq, I found out I was pregnant via a blood draw. As elated as I was, I knew in my gut something was wrong. I had been taking tests for weeks with nothing, even though I had shown every symptom. The blood draw nagged at me, and my sergeant, yes, that very same one, took me over to the Army hospital to double check. I saw the little blob floating outside of its designated zone and was diagnosed with an ectopic pregnancy. I was devastated. I loved my partner, considered myself a very staunch Christian. It could not bear the thought of terminating my pregnancy. But as I sat there trying to rationalize the irrational, I knew that I could not let my parents bury their daughter after they had just spent a 15-month deployment waiting for the worst. So I made the impossible choice. I will never be able to shake the threats and anger from the protesters outside the clinic the day we went, the ones screaming at me for my lack of integrity when they had no idea why I was there. I can't remember much from that day. Trauma's funny like that. But I vividly remember sitting on the bathroom floor of my barracks room, totally alone, bleeding out, and begging to die. I went to the ER of the same Army hospital that had diagnosed my condition and was rejected by medical staff when they found out why I was there, including a female physician saying I deserved it. The rest of my memory has been lost to months of black. Despite the many times we were preached at to take care of one another, to depend on our unit, I was left completely alone. It became my burden to bear, and the one that I kept silent about for many years to come, buried in alcoholism and PTSD. Attending Boise State has been a bit of a serendipitous experience. After I left the Army, I had no desire to revisit my past. Going to college was going to be my fresh start after finally achieving sobriety, and I was ready to do something I was really good at, academia. My very first class my freshman year, Monday at 8 a.m., was UF 100, and centered on the theme of a literary journey. We were to read 1001 Arabian Nights, and we spent quite a bit of the class talking about the Middle East in both past and present. I learned so much that had been outside of my purview when I was living there, and I was also forced to reconcile with what I thought I knew as the naive 19-year-old who had deployed with what I believed in as the 29-year-old sitting in that chair. For the first time, I challenged my ideas of integrity. What if integrity wasn't just telling the truth or doing the right thing when no one is watching like they teach us in grade school? What if it meant challenging those actions and beliefs even when you were taught that they were the right thing to do? I was 12 when the towers were hit on 9/11. Like many from my generation, I joined the Army after high school with the idea that I would protect my country. We were told that we went over there to keep it from coming over here, i.e. that religious extremism and violence had no place on our shores, so we needed to deal with the threat on their own turf. Admittedly, I spent my entire deployment in fear, waiting at every turn for the terrorism I had been told to expect. While it certainly wasn't all rainbows, most of what I found instead were buildings decimated by our mortar shells, interpreters who sacrificed their own safety to help our mission, and women in prison for standing up against men who were abusing them. I didn't see terrorists. I saw humans who were wary of these individuals wearing uniforms who had been potentially sent to kill them. In hindsight, I can't blame everyone around us for being a little leery. Despite that, I was always welcome to a meal with the Iraqi police, or to discuss theology with the interpreters, or to share chai with the vendors within our base walls. Yet, even with all the kindness I experienced, I never once challenged the histories of violence that I had been taught, the stereotypical views I held regarding Muslim women, or the fact that everyone around us was supposed to be a potential threat. What integrity was guiding my actions then? May 2022 thrust my integrity back into the forefront once again with the leaked Dobbs decision from the Supreme Court. Since 2009, I had kept my ectopic pregnancy and the aftermath relatively close to my chest, and had never told anyone outside of a small group of people the full events that had taken place. The conversations floating around campus and the internet brought me face to face with this thing that I had buried for years, and I found myself in the middle of a full-blown PTSD attack. After several therapy sessions, I realized that my safety no longer required my silence and keeping my head down and mouth shut. So I made a Facebook post and shared my story for the very first time. It felt like an elephant had taken a foot off my chest. My relief, however, came at a price. I lost the opinion and support of many friends and family. I received death threats from strangers and friends alike, and I was told over and over again that I do not deserve the life that I have now, and that my children should never have been born. As I sat in the midst of all this, my sergeant's words came back to haunt me. You have no integrity. It hit me like a freight train that he was right. I lacked integrity when I was a soldier and just let everything happen to me. I lacked it when I was walking up to that clinic and silently took in all the abuse that was thrown at me. And I lacked it most when I kept my story to myself, when it may have saved the life and sanity of another person. Integrity no longer means honesty to me. It means action. Living with integrity requires constantly revisiting what I think I know and questioning where those beliefs stem from. It means realizing that we all have a complicated history and that we never know what someone has survived. It means, as a historian, framing my research to benefit the groups whose rights or very existence are in question, and using that knowledge to further advance our conversations, not limit them. It means, as a professor, creating an environment in which my students are comfortable challenging difficult concepts. It means, as a mother, showing my children that silence is not golden, and that the bystander effect is sometimes even more damaging than participating in abuse yourself. It means advocating for the world I want to leave my children and their friends. And most importantly, it means never again keeping my head down and mouth shut. My safety now demands that I face the world head on with my voice loud and proud.
What I value is a certain something. I don't really even know what it is, so I can't explain or tell you what this thing is, but I can tell you about my relationship with it. This isn't a casual relationship. It's a serious one, born out of necessity. There was a time when I was 22 where I wanted to give up on life. You couldn't reach me on the phone. I'd play video games all day, and I wasn't exactly showering and brushing my teeth regularly. One night, all this came to a head, and I was at the point where I was going to decide if I was going to live or not. As it often does, this thing that I value came to me as a feeling. I felt compelled to go lie down, so I walked down the hall in my apartment, and I laid down on my bed. And I just laid there thinking about how much I hated my life, and that I wanted it to end. But eventually this feeling crept back in, and my walls came down, and it challenged all these things that I was holding as absolute truths. Like my belief that I was a worthless piece of shit, that I wasn't worth love, and that my life wasn't worth living. After this encounter, I got up and I booked my first therapy appointment. Since then, each time I followed this feeling, my life has gotten better. But not everything since then has been perfect. I was at a similar low point a couple years ago. It had been a while since I'd been to therapy, and while I was at work, I made a minor mistake, and that was all it took for me to break down. I went to my truck, and I started sobbing. The only thing I could think of to do was called my former boss, who in an act of love had fired me months prior. We even hugged and cried about it after. He had recognized that I had hated working for him, and he wanted more from me. So when he answered my call, and he might not know that he did this, but he reminded me of the thing that I value so much. I told him, I'm doing the same thing I was doing when I was working for you. I'm miserable, I'm showing up late to work, and I'm avoiding everything. He asked me, what's one thing that you can do that's worth doing? I took a beat. I'd been training in jiu-jitsu for a while, so I told him, I feel like I want to compete in a jiu-jitsu tournament. He said, okay, hang up, find the next tournament, sign up for it, then call me back. So I hung up, and the first thing I did was look at my bank account. I only had about $100 in there, and the sign-up fee was $90. I didn't know what I was going to eat for the next couple of days, but I signed up anyway. I called him back, and it was like a miracle. All that worthlessness had gone away. I literally felt like I had something to live for again. Making that decision to follow that feeling changed so much for me. I had purpose and meaning again, and I couldn't shake how good it felt. So I kept going. I called my mom, and I finally talked about things I'd never told her. Like how my parents' divorce affected me. She offered to pay for me to go back to therapy, and funnily, when I went to set up the appointment with my therapist, she'd already emailed me asking me how I was doing. Felt like she'd sensed how I was feeling. When I got back to therapy, we talked about how all these small changes had helped me and how I wanted to do more things that made me feel so good. I didn't want to fall back on construction work again. I wanted to follow these feelings and see where they led me. She reminded me how I used to talk about going back to college. So I followed this feeling again, and I made the decision to try and attend college. So here I am, almost 2 years later, halfway through a degree in humanities and cultural studies. I answer my phone calls and texts. I shower and brush my teeth regularly. I mountain bike, surf, golf, and do jiu-jitsu still. And I finally feel like I'm living. I don't know what this thing is called. Some might call it love, God, or truth. And I may never know what it is, and I kind of hope I don't. But all I know is that I want to keep chasing this feeling.
One of the earliest childhood memories I have is me sitting at the dining table next to the sliding glass door in my first home. I remember the sunlight shining through, which it was so bright it was almost blinding. It was early in the day, and the sun hadn't yet reached its peak. I sat there, too small for my feet to touch the ground, waiting for my mom to bring me my medicine. It was that gross red medicine you might have had as a kid, where when you were sick, the kind that tastes super bitter with a hint of cherry flavor. My guess is that they tried to make it taste like cherry in the lab, but they never quite succeeded. Anyways, here I was, about just 3 years old, and my mom gave me the medicine. As soon as it hit my tongue, I spit it all out. It was awful. I remember thinking, why would my mom give me this? It's so bad. I'd rather just stay sick than take this to feel better. That moment stuck with me, but not just because of the medicine. Not long after, my parents began fighting about something. I didn't understand why, but I felt something was shifting. Over time, their arguments became more frequent, and eventually, they decided to divorce. I was too young to grasp what was happening, but I remember seeing all of my mom's stuff light up against the wall of our first house. It was one of the first clear signs that things were really changing. As I grew older, the constant traveling back and forth between my parents became more noticeable and annoying. I didn't understand why my mom and dad were living in two different houses, or why they seemed upset with each other all the time. Increasingly, I found myself caught up in their communication issues. Your dad said this. Your mom promised that. I thought your dad was picking you up. Why didn't you ask your mom? It never stopped. I became the middleman, the one who had to communicate for them. It was exhausting, constantly being in the middle. I had to mature faster than most kids because of it. I learned that communication isn't just about talking, but is actually about listening and understanding, and it's much harder than it seems. Miscommunication is exhausting, and being pulled in two directions over and over again takes a toll. A perfect example of the price of my parents' miscommunication is when I kept running out of lunch money in elementary school. I would always have to grab the lunch slip from the principal's office when I ran out of money. Oftentimes, the checkout person would constantly tell me to let my parents know the account was zero or in the negative. I'd always reply, okay, I'll tell them, but I get distracted by conversations with friends about Minecraft or YouTube, and I'd forget. I started forgetting so often that I constantly found myself in the principal's office for a lunch slip. It got to the point where they just have me call my parents on the school phone to let them know that I had no lunch money. Both of them would get frustrated, not with me, but with each other. Of course I can put money in your account, but why didn't your mom put money in your account? Why didn't your dad? The frustrations were mostly communicated to me in person at home, and they would never accept the humility and work it out between them. Of course, they both cared deeply about me and shared the goal for me to have a meal, but they weren't communicating it to each other. They were blaming each other and pulling me towards their side. My experience with my parents' divorce and their constant miscommunications shaped who I am today. It taught me the importance of real communication. Divorces are incredibly complicated, and every situation is different. But one thing that always stands out is how crucial it is for parents to communicate clearly and directly with each other. If my parents had communicated more frequently, a lot of frustrations could have been avoided. I see the same miscommunication today, especially in politics. Both sides shout over each other, accusing one another without ever really stopping to converse. As a newly registered voter, I educate myself to understand both perspectives. Yes, there are differences in how to move the country forward, but there is also many similarities, often lost because of poor communication. It baffles me that despite their platforms, neither side truly communicates with each other. This is the same for many Americans. Sometimes folks will be frustrated with one another and attack each other or pull more individuals to their side without ever once truly conveying what they feel in a respectful or productive way. I encourage people to always exercise their First Amendment right to express their values and beliefs, but to also make sure they are communicating and listening to one another. It's much more meaningful to approach these moments with humility and respect. If communication doesn't start off with those elements, it can become as messy and heated as a fight between two divorced parents frustrated over lunch money for their son. Communication is the key. Without it, all we have is noise. I encourage everyone to express their beliefs, but more importantly, we need to do it with respect and openness. If we don't, we turn our politics into an exhausting tug of war. You'll always have different opinions, and that's okay. It's okay to get frustrated with someone else's point of view. It's okay to completely disagree with someone else's ideas. But if we don't start by communicating, how will we ever understand each other? I currently have a diverse group of friends with vastly different political beliefs, some of them who are staunchly conservative and others who are more liberal. And believe me, it can be hard to get them in the same room sometimes. One friend might passionately debate the need for stricter gun regulations, while another argues for fewer government interventions. Even in these situations, I always encourage open dialogue, drawing from both my past experiences and role as a friend. It's rewarding to watch my friends from different sides of the political aisle communicate and begin to understand each other. I've learned from a lifetime of being in the middle that the first step is to talk with one another. We have more in common than we think, and finding that common ground always starts with communication. Just like what we're doing here tonight, communicating what we value, explaining ourselves, and unpacking where we stand and why.